I never imagined that one day I would face the idea of life after death, until an inexplicable experience made me live it firsthand. My name is Etan Miller, and at 48 years old, I was leading what I considered a fully satisfying life in my comfortable home in Richmond, Virginia. I had a solid career as a chemical engineer, a loving family, and honestly, no interest in religious or spiritual matters. I grew up in a non-religious family where I was always encouraged to trust in science and logic. My father was an astronomy professor, and my mother was a neurosurgeon. Dinner table conversations revolved around astrophysics and neuroscience, not prayers or spiritual beliefs. That's why, when I became an adult, I adopted a radical skepticism. For me, consciousness was merely a reflection of neuronal activity, and death meant an absolute end. I clearly remember many passionate discussions with religious friends. I would challenge them, armed with quotes from Carl Sagan and scientific articles, always asking for proof. I was convinced I could deconstruct their beliefs with logic and concrete data. In particular, I enjoyed debating with Christians, hoping to show them that their conviction didn't hold up under rational scrutiny. My wife, Amelia, grew up in a Christian family, but drifted away from her faith after we married. We raised our children, now adults in college, without any religious commitment. Christmas for us was just a cultural tradition. We lived our lives as a quest to make the most of the here and now, without thinking of anything else. Death in my eyes was the final return to dust, or, as I like to say, to the stardust from which we all come. Looking back on it all now, I see how limited my worldview was. But that's the problem with deeply held beliefs. They seem unshakable until something comes along to shatter them. That's exactly what happened the day everything changed. It started in an ordinary way, like any other day. It was the September 12, 2022, and I was doing the regular maintenance on the solar panels we had installed at our home a few months earlier. We had done this installation as part of an effort to make our house more energy efficient. The weather was pleasant, with that crisp, fresh touch characteristic of autumn in Virginia. The leaves were starting to fall, and I needed to gather them up before the chill became too intense. I was completely absorbed in the daily tasks, unaware that on this particular day, my life would take an unexpected turn. I had done this maintenance many times before, always following the safety procedures rigorously. My harness was securely anchored on the roof, as it should be. What I didn't know, however, was that the anchor points had deteriorated over the weeks, weakened by the constant expansion and contraction of the materials. I had crouched down to grab a bunch of wet leaves when I heard a metallic crack. Suddenly, my stomach dropped. The anchor point had given way, and I found myself sliding down the steep slope of the roof. It was at that moment that time seemed to slow down. I could see the leaves floating around me, passing by. The ground was rushing toward me at a terrifying speed, and even the look of surprise on my neighbor's face, who was working in her garden, seemed to be in slow motion. It wasn't the fall itself that would kill me, but the place where I landed. We were redoing the patio, and I had left several metal stakes for the garden leaning against the house, the points facing up. When I fell, one of those stakes pierced my chest, entering just below my ribcage, puncturing my lung and grazing my heart. The pain was something completely new to me. It was burning and consuming every part of my being, yet at the same time, it felt strangely distant, as if it was happening elsewhere. I could hear my neighbor screaming for help, and I could smell the damp earth beneath me. The metallic taste of my own blood spread in my mouth. My last conscious thought was surprisingly clear, as if I could see everything with a terrifying lucidity. The paramedics then told Amelia that I was clinically dead for 8 minutes. 8 minutes. This would forever change my understanding of reality, consciousness, and existence itself. I had always been arrogant about so-called near-death experiences, thinking they were just simple hallucinations from a dying brain. I believed that random neural impulses created comforting illusions. As consciousness faded away, I had read countless scientific articles explaining these experiences as products of oxygen deprivation, endorphin release, and chemicals released by the brain. In those final moments, I was convinced I understood how things worked. But what happened to me during those 8 minutes defied all the scientific explanations I had accepted. It wasn't a hallucination, a dream, or the product of a dying brain. It was something more real than anything I had ever experienced, and it forced me to question everything I thought I knew about the nature of reality, consciousness, and especially what happens after our death. As I lay there on the cool September ground, feeling my life slip away from me, I realized my understanding of the world was about to change forever. I had no idea I was about to embark on a journey that would shatter my entire worldview and force me to confront truths I had spent my life trying to deny. The universe I was about to discover was far stranger and deeper than anything my materialist philosophy had ever allowed me to imagine. The last thing I remember before everything changed is the distant sound of sirens, becoming fainter as my consciousness faded. Then there was darkness. But it was not the endless void I had always imagined. On the contrary, it was the beginning of something that, even to this day, I still struggle to comprehend. Something that would change me forever. The moment my heart stopped, I felt a sudden and profound shift in my consciousness, something entirely new and different from anything I had ever experienced. There was no tunnel of light, at least not at first. Instead, it felt as though I had awakened in my own body in a completely new way, as if I were floating about 12 feet above it. I could see everything with remarkable clarity, my broken body on the ground, the metal pole still embedded in my chest, my neighbor Suzanne desperately performing CPR while crying. But the most striking thing of all was the absolute calm that enveloped me. There was no pain, just a deep serenity, and in some way, a mental clarity greater than I had ever thought possible. It was as if my consciousness had expanded, as if I had spent my entire life looking at the world through a tiny hole. When the paramedics arrived, their movement seemed almost slow and clumsy, as though I were watching a movie about someone else. I wanted to tell them that everything was fine, that I felt better than good, but of course, they couldn't hear me. I watched them work on my body, cutting my clothes, connecting the defibrillator electrodes, inserting the IV lines. All of this felt so distant, like a scene from a movie, until something strange happened. The scene before me began to fade away, not into darkness, but into something different. Something that I can only describe as a higher resolution of reality. The colors became more vibrant and real than anything I had ever seen on Earth. The dimensions around me started to expand in a way I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just length, width, and height, but something else, something for which I still lack the vocabulary to describe. It was then that a powerful force began to pull me upward, not physically, but in a way that made it feel as if my consciousness was being drawn towards something, as if something beyond me was calling out. And it was at that moment that I saw, not the stereotypical bright tunnel, but something far more complex and mysterious, something that defied everything I knew about reality and existence. What I saw there is something I still find difficult to describe. If I could put into words what I experienced, I would say it was a living geometry, pure consciousness. Imagine for a moment being able to see thought itself. And what if love had a visual form? What if truth could be perceived directly rather than just understood? As I moved through this space, something extraordinary happened. I began to perceive the presence of other beings around me. They were not the cartoonish angels, with their wings and halos figures I had always dismissed with irony. No, they were entities of pure light and intelligence. Their essence radiated a love and wisdom so profound that it made me feel both infinitely small and infinitely precious. One of these beings approached me, and at that moment, something was revealed to me clearly, a truth my skeptical mind had always rejected. Consciousness was not a product of the brain. The brain in reality was more like a receiver, a device that tunes into and limits the higher consciousness, the force that permeates everything around us. Communication with these entities didn't happen through words, but through a direct transmission of thought and understanding. And the message reached me, but not in word form. You have lived your life denying essential truths. In an instant, my entire life unfolded before me. It was not a mere replay of events, but a complex tapestry of choices, consequences, and missed opportunities. I saw, as if I were observing from the outside, all the times I had disdainfully scorned someone's faith. Time and again I had chosen intellectual pride over openness to deeper truths, but this was not shown to me with judgment. No, instead, it was with a profound compassion, so immense that it brought me to my knees. Even in that state, I had no physical body to kneel upon. The message was not one of condemnation. It was an invitation to understanding. The being is not wrong, they said, but it is incomplete. You are looking at the shadow and refusing to see the light that casts it. I was taken into a vision of reality that completely transformed my understanding of the world. I saw clearly and undeniably that the physical universe I had always known was just the superficial layer of something much more complex and deep. I finally understood that consciousness itself was the fundamental fabric of reality, not an emergent property of matter, as I had always believed, but something much greater, more fundamental. But what struck me the most, what left me speechless, was the presence I began to perceive. A presence so overwhelming, with love, wisdom, and power so vast that my skeptical mind struggled to grasp it. This being was not the anthropomorphic God I had always imagined, a being with human form and characteristics. No, it was something much deeper, much more essential, something that transcended everything I could conceive. And it was at that moment, in this state of pure consciousness, that I realized that my entire life, my whole existence, it was then, with a deep shock, that I understood that this presence was what humanity had always tried to describe as, yet our attempts to describe it were as limited as a child's drawing, trying to capture the complexity of a living person. As this understanding spread through my mind, something even more astonishing was revealed to me. I saw souls. There are no other words to describe them. In different states after death, some walked toward the light, drawn by its truth and immense love, while others turned away. At that moment, I understood with absolute clarity that these choices were personal. No one was being punished. It wasn't an external condemnation, but rather each soul experiencing the natural consequences of its own decisions and beliefs. I saw how every being had the opportunity to choose truth, but also how that choice became increasingly difficult as they rejected the light throughout their lives. I witnessed people who had followed false prophets and teachings, not out of malice, but out of error and confusion. Every religious tradition, every philosophy contained fragments of truth, but often these fragments had been distorted or misinterpreted over time. Then, the being who was guiding me showed me something that completely shattered my scientific materialism. The true nature of Jesus Christ, not as the religious figure I had always rejected, but as something much deeper. the intersection of divine and human consciousness, the meeting point between the finite and the infinite. I understood that the story of Christ was not just a historical account, a singular event, or a religious myth. It was a fundamental pattern, woven into the very fabric of reality. I was revealed how salvation works, not merely as a matter of believing in the right things, but as a profound transformation of consciousness. The sacraments, the rituals I had always considered empty, were unveiled before me as spiritual technologies. They were not just rituals, but powerful forms that align human consciousness with divine truth. They were tools for inner transformation, instruments to lift the soul to a deeper and truer understanding of the universe. Good deeds were not merely moral acts, but expressions of that deep harmony, of that inner transformation. And it was then that the being showed me something that made me weep with repentance. I saw the souls of those whom, in one way or another, I had influenced through my atheism. I saw how my arguments, which I believed to be rational, had created waves of doubt, distancing some people from the truth. I saw my own children growing up, striving to find meaning in a universe that I had told them was devoid of any purpose. But it wasn't too late. The message was clear. You have the opportunity to return and share what you have learned. It was then that I was led to a vast reservoir of knowledge, something I could only describe as entire libraries on the nature of reality, consciousness. I clearly saw how many current human beliefs and their practices were actually distancing people from the truth, rather than bringing them closer. I witnessed the devastating consequences of moral relativism, the rejection of absolute truth, and adherence to ideologies that contradicted divine law. Then, I was led to a place I can only describe as a great assembly, though no words could truly capture what I experienced. I saw souls being judged, but not by an angry deity as I had imagined. Instead, they were revealed by the perfect light of truth, against which no lie could resist. I observed in silence as each soul saw their life in perfect detail. Every choice, every action, every influence they had on others. Some souls radiated joy as their lives were revealed. Their faith and good deeds shone like gold. Others recoiled in horror as they saw the true nature of their choices and the impact they had on others. What struck me most was that no external judgment was necessary. The state of each soul was simply revealed in the light of truth. It was then that I witnessed something that filled me with a mix of wonder and terror. The reality of hell, but not the caricatured hell I had once mocked. Instead, I understood that hell was not a place of torture, but a state of consciousness. It was a voluntary separation from truth and love, chosen by those who refuse to accept reality as it is. The separation was real, but it was the separation from truth that burned away all that was false. Time did not exist in that place. What seemed like years of learning and understanding may have actually been just a few seconds in earthly time. I was shown the power of prayer, how it truly works, not as a simple supernatural request, but as a means to align human consciousness with divine reality. I witnessed how the communion of saints operated in dimensions of reality I didn't even know existed. Just when I thought I could absorb no more, I was shown something that left me astonished. The reality of divine judgment. I saw how each soul would inevitably face the moment of truth, the revelation of reality as it truly is. There was no reincarnation. Every soul had one life, one opportunity to choose truth over falsehood, light over darkness. Then the being communicated something that sounded both like a warning and a promise at the same time. What you have seen is just a fraction of reality, but it is enough. You will return with the mission to share these truths. Many will reject them just as you did once before, but some will listen and understand. As these words resonated in my consciousness, I began to feel a sensation of withdrawal, a force pulling me back toward my physical body. The presence of the being began to fade, but not before delivering one final message. Remember the truth you have seen. It is not yours to alter or adapt. Share it exactly as it is, for in these times of confusion, pure truth is needed now more than ever. Simply a process of returning to my body. I passed through layers of reality, each revealing new truths and perspective. As I returned, I felt the vastness of what I now knew, and the mission that awaited me. I saw how the spiritual and physical worlds intertwine, how angels and demons influence human consciousness, always respecting free will. It was as if I were witnessing a spiritual battle taking place around the earth, not with swords and spears, but with truth and lies as weapons. I saw how certain ideologies and movements, which proclaimed themselves defenders of love and acceptance, were actually leading souls away from divine truth. I was shown how arguments that seemed compassionate were used to justify behaviors that violated divine law. This became particularly clear when the truth about sexuality and humanity's gender was revealed to me. I understood how the rejection of divine design in the modern world was causing profound spiritual damage. What many called progress was, in fact, a regression from divine truth. I finally understood why these laws existed, not as arbitrary rules, but as reflections of deeper spiritual realities. The being also showed me the truth about other religions. I saw how they contained fragments of truth but had been infiltrated by illusion. I witnessed how false prophets had misled millions while claiming divine authority. This was not shown to me with hatred or contempt, but with a deep sadness for the deceived soul. As I descended through these layers of reality, I began to understand why I was being sent back. My scientific training, which I had once thought was an obstacle to my mission, was actually a tool I could use to help others understand. I had spent my life believing that I was following only evidence and reason, until I realized that I was viewing everything through a deliberately limited lens. The closer I got to my body, the more I felt the weight of physical reality pressing down, diminishing the clarity of spiritual consciousness. Although the fundamental truths remained intact, I was shown how the human brain acts as a filter that limits our perception of spiritual reality, allowing us to function in the physical world. That's why we typically do not perceive the spiritual battles around us. We do not see angels and demons in their true form. Before reintegrating my body, I had one last vision. I saw two possible futures. One where I kept silent about everything I had learned, leading to the ongoing illusion of those around me. And the other where I boldly spoke the truth, regardless of the cost to my reputation or relationships. The choice was clear. The moment of returning to my body was, indeed, traumatic. It was like trying to force an ocean of consciousness through a straw. The physical pain was immediate and overwhelming. I heard the paramedics shouting, felt the jolt of the defibrillator, the taste of copper in my mouth. The perfect peace of the spiritual realm was replaced by the harsh reality of a damaged body, struggling for its life. "We have a pulse," someone shouted. The pain was unbearable, but it paled in comparison to the weight of what I had just experienced. I wanted to tell it all right then, to share the profound truths I had learned, but my body wouldn't cooperate. There I was lying down, tears streaming down my face as they placed me in the ambulance. During the ride to the hospital, I kept losing consciousness. Each time I closed my eyes, I could still see fragments of that higher reality, like images etched in my mind. The beings of light were gone, but their presence had left an indelible mark on my soul. In the moments between consciousness and unconsciousness, I began to understand all the implications of what I had witnessed. The scientific worldview I had defended for decades was not just incomplete, but had been willfully limited. It was like a man insisting that the world was flat because he could only see the horizon. I had denied the existence of anything beyond the material realm. The paramedics were frantically working to keep me stable, unaware that I was experiencing something far beyond their medical understanding. Each time they encountered a bump in the road, seeing waves of pain in my body, I would briefly return to that higher state of consciousness. In those moments, I could see spiritual beings accompanying the ambulance, their presence bringing comfort, even as my body fought for its life. I saw how each person in that ambulance had their own guardian angels, even if they weren't aware of it. I observed how these beings of light helped guide the hands of the paramedics, whispering suggestions into their minds and maintaining the delicate balance between life and death. But even so, they never interfered with free will. They merely suggested, never commanded. The being who guided me on my journey continued to communicate with me, but in a less direct manner. "Remember," it said to me, "what you have seen is not meant to remain private. The time of silence about these truths is over. The world needs to hear them now, more than ever." As we approached the hospital, another profound truth was revealed to me. I saw how prayers actually worked. I could see rays of light representing the prayers from my wife, my children, and others who had heard about my accident. These prayers were not just thoughts or wishes. They were true spiritual energy, directing divine power toward specific goals. In the emergency room, while the doctors worked to save my life, I witnessed something that left me both confused and in awe. I saw how each medical procedure, every medication, every technique used, was a true cooperation between the physical reality and the spiritual reality. The knowledge and skills of the doctors were important, but they were guided and assisted by spiritual forces they could not perceive. I observed the angels present in the operating room, their presence affecting the outcome in a way that the medical team did not understand. When crucial treatment decisions needed to be made, I saw how divine wisdom was offered to the doctors through subtle impressions and intuitions. Some were more receptive to this guidance than others, but all were assisted, whether they knew it or not. During the surgery, to repair my lung and address the damage near my heart, I had another profound experience. I was shown how each heartbeat, each breath, each neural impulse was a miracle, not in the sense of violating natural laws, but in the sense that they were supported by divine power. The very laws of physics were revealed as expressions of divine will, and not as independent forces. The being showed me how my scientific work, which I thought was refuting the need for God, actually revealed divine wisdom all along. The elegant mathematics underlying physical reality, the incredible complexity of biological systems, the mysterious quantum realm. All of this was glimpses of the divine truth that I had stubbornly interpreted through materialistic eyes. As the surgeons worked to save my life, I was guided towards a vision of the impact that my future testimony would have on others. I saw scientists, doctors, and intellectuals who would listen to my story and begin to question their own materialistic assumption. But I also saw the opposition I would face, mockery, accusations of brain injury or delusion, and the potential loss of professional respect. During the operation, I continued to receive revelations about the nature of reality. I saw how consciousness was not produced by the brain, but that it passed through it like light through a prism. The physical brain acted as a reducer, filtering the vast ocean of consciousness down to a manageable level that could operate within the confines of physical reality. What fascinated me most was understanding how anesthesia worked on a spiritual level. As my body was under its influence, my consciousness expanded, becoming freer to perceive spiritual reality. I observed as the surgeons meticulously repaired the damage, but I also saw how each step of the procedure was guided by divine wisdom, working through the skilled hands of the doctors. The being that guided me showed me something that particularly shocked my scientific sensibility: how spiritual forces affected physical healing. I saw an energy that I can only describe as divine love circulating through my damaged tissues, accelerating the healing process in a way that would later astonish my doctors. But this was not a magical intervention. It was the natural functioning of a spiritual law that science had not yet recognized. At a particularly critical moment during the operation, when my heartbeat became dangerously irregular, I witnessed something extraordinary. I saw Jesus himself enter the operating room, not in the human form depicted in art, but as a pure presence of light, pure love and truth. His intensity was such that, had the medical team been able to see him, they would have been amazed. He touched my physical heart, and immediately the monitors showed a return to normal rhythm. He communicated to me, "This is not just for you. What you have seen is meant to show how divine intervention works in the physical world. It follows laws and patterns, just like physics, but these laws operate at a higher level of reality." I was then shown how many modern medical treatments actually work in cooperation with spiritual reality, even though doctors are unaware of it. Prayer, faith, and positive thinking were not just psychological factors. They had real and measurable effects as they aligned physical reality with spiritual truth. The being explained to me how many of humanity's major scientific discoveries have, in fact, been inspired by God and given to researchers who became receptive to divine wisdom. However, when these discoveries were interpreted solely through materialistic lenses, their deeper meaning was lost. When the operation was over and my body was taken to recovery, I received one of the deepest revelations. Every human soul is created with a specific purpose, a unique role in the divine plan. My near-death experience was not just about changing my own beliefs. It was meant to prepare me to help others understand the bigger picture of reality. I saw how my scientific training was, in reality, a preparation for this very purpose. Who better to explain spiritual reality to the skeptic than someone who has already lived in doubt and shared their worldview? I was shown how my years of research, my understanding of the scientific method, and even my prior knowledge of atheism would help bridge the gap between material and spiritual understanding. During those hours of recuperation, wandering between physical and spiritual consciousness, I received detailed instructions on how to share what I had learned. I saw how I could present these truths in ways that would reach different types of people: scientists, religious individuals, seekers, skeptics, and believers. But I was also warned of the challenges ahead. I saw how some would try to dismiss my experience as mere hallucination or the product of a dying brain. Others would accept parts of my testimony, but would attempt to reinterpret them to fit their pre-existing beliefs. The being insisted on the importance of sharing the truth in its entirety, raw and unfiltered, even when it contradicted popular opinions or cultural trends. As I spent time recuperating, the visions and revelations continued. Although the intensity diminished as my body healed, the being showed me how the modern world had strayed from divine truth, not only in obvious ways, but also through subtle and insidious thought patterns that had infiltrated even among religious believers. I witnessed how certain ideologies had seeped into society, presenting themselves as compassionate and progressive, while in reality, they diverted souls from the truth. One of the most difficult revelations concerned sexuality and human relationships. I saw how the redefinition of marriage, confusion about gender, and the normalization of various sexual behaviors were not just social changes. The being showed me how these changes were destroying the divine model of human relationships, causing deep spiritual wounds that would take generations. These truths will be difficult to share, the being told me, but they must be spoken. Many souls are lost because no one dares to speak the truth in the face of social pressure. I was shown how modern entertainment media and educational systems were being used to gradually reshape human consciousness, steering it away from divine truth. What seemed like progress on the surface was, in reality, a carefully orchestrated movement to distance humanity from spiritual reality. The being showed me how this deception particularly affected children, programming them from a young age to reject divine wisdom in favor of human philosophies. During a particularly profound vision, I was shown the true nature of time and eternity. I understood why there is no reincarnation. Each soul's earthly life is perfectly designed as a complete journey, a single opportunity to choose truth over lie. The being revealed to me how the idea of multiple lives diminishes the significance of the choices made in this life, as it leads us to believe there will always be another chance. I saw souls entering eternity. Some radiated joy as they embraced the truth they had lived, while others recoiled, horrified as they faced the reality they had denied. The being showed me how every choice, every action, and every belief during physical life has eternal consequences. It was not about punishment, but rather the natural outcomes of aligning with or rejecting the truth. The task entrusted to me was to help people understand that time on earth is their only opportunity to choose the truth. There is no second chance in another life. Every moment counts eternally. As my body continued to heal, I received increasingly detailed insights on how to share these truths effectively. The being showed me how to use my scientific training to explain spiritual realities in a way that skeptics could understand. I was guided on how to address common objections, present evidence that resonated with different types of people, and maintain my credibility while sharing seemingly incredible truths. But perhaps the most profound revelation came when I was shown the future impact of my testimony. I saw how my story would reach people who had been misled by false teachings, helping them find their way back to the truth. I witnessed how my scientific approach to spiritual reality would bridge the gap between faith and reason, providing an entry point for many souls seeking understanding. The being showed me something that particularly impressed my scientific mind: the mathematics of eternity. I saw how our limited choices in this life create infinite consequences, not through arbitrary divine actions, but through the natural operation of spiritual laws. Just as a small difference in angle at the start of a line transforms into a vast distance at infinity, our seemingly small choices in life create eternal trajectories in the spiritual realm. I was shown more about the nature of angels and demons. They are not caricatures or fictional characters as portrayed by popular imagination, but intelligent beings acting according to spiritual laws as precise as those of physics. I observed how they influence human consciousness through thoughts, feelings, and subtle suggestions, always respecting free will, yet constantly working to guide souls toward the truth or away from it. The being revealed how modern technology, though neutral in itself, was used to shape human consciousness in a way that made it increasingly difficult to perceive spiritual reality. Constant distraction, artificial stimulation, virtual relationships. All of this created a kind of spiritual static, making it harder for souls to hear the divine truth. I was instructed to observe how social media algorithms and entertainment platforms were actually disguised spiritual technologies, slowly reconnecting human consciousness with artificial experiences rather than true spiritual connection. I saw how this affected meditation, prayer, and people's ability to perceive the divine presence. One of the most surprising revelations concerned the nature of good works and faith. The being showed me how these two elements were not separate things, but rather two aspects of the same true spiritual reality. Faith naturally produced good works, but only true faith could generate genuine good works. Both were necessary for spiritual growth, just like the two wings of a bird. I witnessed how prayers and sacraments functioned at a quantum level, creating ripples in the spiritual reality that subtly but measurably affected physical matter. The being showed me how eventually scientific instruments might detect these effects, although correct interpretation would require a deeper spiritual understanding. During a particularly intense vision, I was shown the true nature of human consciousness and its relationship with the divine. Our individual consciousness, while it seems separate and independent, was like a wave in the vast ocean of divine consciousness. We were connected to the divine source while maintaining our unique identity. It was not pantheism, for although we are part of the whole, we remain distinct individuals. The being explained how this understanding had been distorted by various religious traditions. Some claimed we were all gods, while others saw us as completely separate from God. The truth that was revealed to me was more complex and beautiful. We were created in the image of God, capable of participating in the divine nature without losing our unique identity. As my physical healing progressed, I received detailed instructions on how to share these truths. I was shown how to use scientific concepts as bridges for spiritual understanding, how to present evidence in a way that would resonate with different types of minds, and how to maintain my integrity while discussing experiences that seemed physical laws. The being then revealed something that profoundly challenged my scientific mindset: the true nature of miracles. I saw how they were not violations of natural laws, but rather the operation of higher spiritual laws that transcended physical law. Just as quantum physics seems to defy classical physics, these miracles operated at a deeper level, where the spiritual laws prevailed. Miracles functioned according to precise spiritual principles that our science had yet to understand. During a deep vision, I witnessed how divine healing truly worked. I saw an energy that I can only describe as pure love, flowing through different levels of reality, reorganizing matter at the quantum level. The being showed me how many biblical miracles were actually demonstrations of these higher laws, recorded by people who, at the time, lacked the scientific vocabulary to describe what they were experiencing. My scientific training was revealed as a tool that would help me explain these truths to others, bridging the gap between faith and reason. I was shown how these two dimensions are not opposed, but rather partners in understanding reality. I witnessed how true repentance created real changes in spiritual reality, reorganizing the energetic patterns of a soul. It was not just about feeling regret or promising to improve, but a fundamental transformation at the deepest level of consciousness. The being revealed to me how this process of repentance and transformation was directly linked to the sacrament. I saw how baptism, communion, and other sacramental acts were not merely symbolic rituals, but authentic spiritual technologies that facilitated divine grace. They operated according to principles as precise as physical laws, although they required faith to activate their full potential. During these revelations, I was also shown the true nature of evil, not as an equal opposite to good, but as a deprivation, an absence of truth and divine love. I witnessed how the souls that chose evil never opened themselves to something positive, but actually rejected reality itself. This helped me understand why the separation was eternal, not because God desired it, but because these souls continuously chose to reject the truth. One of the deepest revelations involved the relationship between time and eternity, allowing me to further grasp the nature of choices and how each human act resonated in the spiritual realm. I was shown how our choices on earth created eternal consequences, not through an arbitrary divine decree, but through the natural operation of spiritual laws. Just like a mathematical function that continues indefinitely based on its initial conditions, our souls pursued their eternal journey, shaped by the choices we made on earth. The being repeatedly emphasized the importance of sharing these truths, especially in the current time when many souls were lost, having never heard the truth in a way they could understand. I was told that my scientific background would be crucial in reaching those conditioned to reject anything considered religious or supernatural. During what seemed to be the final phase of these revelations, I was shown something that deeply impressed me: the exact mechanism by which consciousness interacted with the physical brain. I saw how thoughts actually originated in the spiritual realm before being translated into neural activity, like radio waves transformed into sound by a receiver. The being demonstrated this process in real time, showing my brain activity from both a physical and spiritual viewpoint simultaneously. I witnessed how spiritual forces influenced the release of neurotransmitters, how prayer affected brainwave patterns, and how divine inspiration literally reconnected neural circuits. This helped me understand that materialistic science may never fully explain consciousness, as scientists only study the receiver while denying the existence of the transmission. Next, I was shown a series of specific cases where souls made their eternal decisions. I saw people I personally knew. Some chose the light, while others rejected the truth. What struck me the most was realizing that these choices were not isolated dramatic moments, but rather the culmination of thousands of small decisions, each either opening or closing the heart to the truth. The being revealed to me how society's obsession with self-determination and personal truth was, in reality, a form of spiritual suicide. These seemingly small decisions had created eternal trajectories, and many people were unaware of it. I witnessed how phrases like "my truth" and "living my authentic self" often masked a deeper rejection of divine reality. The being showed me how this seemingly harmless philosophy was leading many souls towards an eternal separation from the truth. Truth is not personal, nor something imprinted within me. It exists independently of human belief or acceptance. The task I was given was to help people understand this before it was too late. What seemed to be the pinnacle of my near-death experience offered me a comprehensive view of how all these truths fit together. I saw how physical reality, quantum mechanics, consciousness, free will, divine grace, and eternal consequences function as parts of a unified system of reality, a system much more complex and beautiful than I had ever imagined. In my scientific career, the being's final communication was both a promise and a warning. What you have seen is real. Many will attempt to reject or distort these truths, but you must remain true to what you have witnessed. Your scientific credibility will be both a blessing and a curse. Reading this wisely, as my consciousness began to return to my physical body, the being revealed to me one last series of profound revelation. I witnessed how each soul's journey is unique, yet interconnected, creating a vast tapestry of spiritual development that stretches across both time and eternity. I saw how the rejection of absolute truth by the modern world had created a spiritual crisis, unlike any other period in human history. The being showed me how artificial intelligence, social media, and virtual reality were creating new types of spiritual challenges that souls had never faced before. These technologies were not inherently bad, but they were being used to create artificial substitutes for for true spiritual experience. Human consciousness was undergoing a restructuring, drifting away from divine reality towards artificial constructs. I was told that my testimony would be crucial because you understand the scientific and spiritual dimensions of this crisis. In the final moments of my experience, I was given a detailed understanding of how the brain would filter and process my near-death experience when I returned. I was shown why some details seemed clearer than others, and how certain aspects of what I had experienced would be almost impossible to express in human language. The being revealed how my experience would be received by different groups. Some skeptics would try to explain it through materialistic theories. Some religious people would accept parts while rejecting others, and some individuals would recognize the ring of truth in my testimony because they had been prepared by divine grace to receive it. The last impression that stayed etched in me was clear and profound. Always remember what has been imprinted in you. You are not responsible for how others receive these truths. Your responsibility is simply to share them in a faithful and complete manner. As my consciousness began its final descent into physical reality, I was overwhelmed by a sensation of divine love, so profound that it seemed to rewrite every cell of my body. I then understood that love was not just an emotion or a choice. It was the fundamental force of reality itself, the energy that held together the physical and spiritual realm. The last thing I saw before fully returning to my body was a vision of hope. Souls awakening to the truth, minds opening to a deeper reality, hearts turning towards divine love despite the challenges ahead. I was shown that the truth would ultimately prevail, not through force or argumentation, but by the irresistible power of divine love expressing itself through faithful witnesses. Waking up in the hospital felt like being born again, but into a world that suddenly seemed superficial and dark compared to what I had experienced. The fluorescent lights, the beeping of machines, the well-meaning medical team, everything felt like a crude simulation of reality compared to the crystalline clarity I had witnessed. Amelia was there, holding my hand, her eyes red from so many tears. Our children had come home from college, and they all looked at me with a mix of relief and concern, unaware that the person they knew, the convinced skeptic, the rational scientist, had been profoundly transformed. The doctors were amazed at my recovery. The metal rod had missed my heart by mere millimeters, what they termed a stroke of pure luck. I smiled upon hearing that word, now understanding that apparent coincidences were not violations of natural laws, but expressions of higher spiritual principles. My colleagues from the engineering firm came to visit, bringing technical documents and industry journals to pass the time, but I could barely concentrate on them anymore. How could I care about analyzing the stress of new materials when I had witnessed the fundamental structure of reality itself? How could I return to studying chemical reactions when I had seen how consciousness itself shapes physical matter? The hardest part was figuring out how to share what I had experienced. I started with Amelia, speaking hesitantly at first, watching her face for signs of doubt, but something in my voice and gaze must have conveyed the truth of what I was saying. She listened to me with growing admiration, occasionally wiping tears from her eyes. "It's like you're a different person," she finally told me, "but in a way more yourself than ever." My children had been a bigger challenge. We grew up in a secular family, taught to trust only in science and reason, and they've struggled to understand my narrative. My daughter Clara, a cognitive science student at a prestigious university, tried to explain my experience through theories about the death of brain cells and the release of chemicals. My son Ben, a computer programmer, listened in silence, looking visibly uncomfortable. Clara said, You know that all of this can be explained by science. Your brain was deprived of oxygen, which caused comforting hallucinations. I smiled, remembering how I would have said exactly the same thing just a few weeks ago. Clara, I replied, what if science only sees part of the picture? What if consciousness isn't produced by the brain, but simply transmitted through it? The real challenge came when I returned to work, no longer as a renowned skeptical engineer, but as a person who had witnessed the creation of divine reality. This caused quite a stir in professional circles. Some colleagues avoided me, while others tried to psychiatry me to understand what had happened. Some listened with genuine interest, especially those who had experienced inexplicable events themselves, but had never dared to share. My research transformed. While I was still pursuing rigorous scientific studies, I began seeking ways to bridge the gap between physical and spiritual understanding. I studied the measurable effects of prayer on physical systems, the relationship between consciousness and quantum phenomena, and the energetic correlations of spiritual experience. Some labeled me suicidal, but with every closed door, another one opened. I began giving lectures that blended hard science and spiritual intuition. People were hungry for this perspective, for someone capable of speaking both languages, showing how faith and reason were not enemies, but partners in understanding reality. Writing articles about my experience has proven to be a challenge. Academic journals rejected them as unscientific, while religious publications found my approach too clinical. But I persevered, knowing that these truths needed to be shared in a way that both scientists and spiritual seekers could understand. I then created a blog where I could freely share my vision, blending rigorous scientific analysis with the profound truths I had learned during my near-death experience. I wrote about the nature of consciousness, the illusion of death, the reality of the spiritual world, and the deep implications of divine law for our daily lives. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people from all walks of life began to follow my blog, sharing their own stories, asking questions, and seeking guidance. I found myself in the unlikely role of a spiritual teacher, a role I had never sought, but one I now embraced with humility and a deep sense of responsibility. I started receiving invitations to speak at conferences, worship services, and even scientific symposiums. My unique perspective, that of a trained engineer who had witnessed spiritual reality firsthand, resonated with people in a way that traditional religious or scientific discussions often failed to do. One of the most rewarding aspects of this new chapter in my life was seeing how my testimony affected others. I received countless messages from people struggling with doubt, sorrow, or spiritual confusion, telling me how my story had given them hope, comfort, and a renewed sense of purpose. I reconnected with my wife's faith, attending church with her, not as someone culturally obligated, but as an authentic spiritual practice. I began studying the Bible and the writings of early Christian mystics, finding echoes of the truth I had experienced firsthand. My children remained skeptical, but our relationship deepened. They witnessed the positive changes in me, greater patience, deeper compassion, an unshakable sense of my purpose. Although they didn't fully accept my explanations, they respected the transformation they witnessed. My professional life took an unexpected turn when I was offered a position at a newly established research institute dedicated to exploring the intersection of science and spirituality. There, I was finally able to conduct the kind of research I had always dreamed of, studies that took both physical and spiritual realities seriously. I continued to give lectures, write articles, cycle, and participate in public discussions about my experiences and their implication. I emphasized the importance of maintaining rigorous scientific standards while remaining open to realities beyond the material realm. I spoke about the dangers of moral relativism, the importance of adhering to divine law, and the profound consequences of our choices for our eternal destiny. My message has not always been popular. I faced criticism from both the scientific and religious community. Some scientists accused me of abandoning reason for mysticism, while some religious leaders claimed I was distorting the scriptures to fit my personal experience. But I stood firm, guided by the unwavering conviction that the truths I had witnessed were real and needed to be shared, regardless of opposition. I knew many were misled by false teachings, and that the modern world desperately needed a return to divine truth. My journey continues as I use my engineering skills to build bridges between science and spiritual reality, guiding those who seek to embrace the truth. If you found this story as transformative as thousands of others did, be sure to click the subscribe button and activate the bell. We publish new near-death experience stories every week that will challenge everything you think you know about consciousness and reality. Like this video, and if you want to see more content like this, leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the incredible journey of being. Join our growing community of truth seekers and help spread these transformative testimonies around the world.